Whether this episode is pronounced as Me2 or Me2, I don't really care. I'm going with Me2 for this review. Anyway, on with the actual review. Picking up from Confidence and Paranoia's cliffhanger, this episode begins with Lister clearing away Rimmer's things as he moves into the room next door with his duplicate hologram. This opening is pretty good. The early Red Dwarf series, mainly the first two, focused on Rimmer and Lister, with the cat only getting a few scenes, particularly in Series 1. The scenes between Rimmer and Lister are always a highlight. They became far less prominent as the show went on and more characters appeared. The humour works quite well. Much like scenes like this in Series 1, it has a sort of odd couple feel to it. Visually speaking, it is rather impressive having two Rimmers on screen at once. I can imagine this episode was quite technically complex to make, and certainly for the time. Some of the effects haven't aged perfectly, but with Red Dwarf, corny special effects don't really bother me. Lister starts adjusting his room to how he wants it now that Rimmer has gone. The scene is alright. Craig Charles demonstrates good comedic timing, which is impressive, considering he had nobody to bounce off of. Lister notices that he forgot to pack the tape of Rimmer's death. Lister skips through a large chunk of the video, mainly because it consists of Rimmer talking directly to the camera, and this includes poetry readings for one. The video itself is effectively a recreation of the actual event, as is stated in the episode. Just before Rimmer snuffs it, he says, "Gazpacho soup." The scene that Lister watches is overly dramatic and over the top, and I find it quite funny. The scenes involving Rimmer and the identical hologram Rimmer are brilliant throughout. Chris Barry has had to be the on-screen highlight for this episode, as he effectively plays two characters. Lister becomes determined to find out why Rimmer's final words were, "Gazpacho soup." He skims through Rimmer's diary but doesn't find anything noteworthy. The cat briefly appears, sneaking out of a cupboard. This scene is a bit of a filler scene. It does add to the story as Lister is flicking through Rimmer's diary, but though the scene is brief, it adds very little to the episode. The next scene is one of the all-time scene highlights of Red Dwarf. Lister is in his room blowing up bubblegum and measuring it. The opening shot of this scene is quite striking, I think, and generally the directing and shot composition in this episode is pretty good. Anyway, so Holly claims that Red Dwarf is being tracked by the Norweb Federation who are from Earth. Norweb stands for the Northwesterly Electricity Board. The whole story that Holly makes up is fantastic. This scene is available on YouTube and it's brilliant. I recommend you watch it. Craig Charles and Norman Lovett both have great comedic timing. Craig Charles gives a very energetic and intentionally over-exaggerated performance, and Norman Lovett has a great deadpan delivery. This scene doesn't add much to the overall story, but unlike the scene involving Lister flicking through Rimmer's diary, this scene is actually quite funny. What follows is a scene featuring Rimmer and Rimmer. The visual effects of seeing two Rimmers has aged quite well, considering the budget and the time in which this was made. Chris Barry gives two contrasting performances, I find, with the two Rimmers. The sight of seeing two Rimmers arguing is in itself quite funny. The dialogue works really well, and in terms of Rimmer's established character so far in the series, also makes quite a bit of sense. This whole section of the episode is probably my favourite. It works tremendously well. The transition from Lister being fooled by Holly to the two Rimmers arguing is very good. It's quite funny as well and works as Red Dwarf's unique style of humour. The cinema scene is quite good. I've mentioned before how much I like the cinema set, but unlike in Balance of Power, we actually spend a bit more time in the cinema. The Citizen Kane joke works surprisingly well, a quick little joke before it could outstay its welcome. The second Rimmer arrives and what follows a confrontation between the two Rimmers. The dialogue works pretty well and Craig Charles manages to have great timing despite the technical complications of the scene. Lister then decides that enough is enough and one of the Rimmers has to go and arranges them to meet in the drive room in a few minutes. The next scene involves Rimmer in military attire while the other Rimmer has been switched off unbeknownst to Rimmer. Rimmer, thinking he's about to be switched off, tells Lister the truth about gazpacho soup. This scene is pretty good, though I would have preferred some sort of flashback footage to play while Rimmer was telling the story. And that's basically it, the end of Me2 and Series 1. So Me2 was decent, it had some funny scenes and good performances and visual effects that have aged surprisingly well. But it lacks something. It feels maybe a tad disposable and forgettable. Me2 was quickly written in the place of the finale, which never got made due to the strike action which nearly cancelled Red Dwarf before it even started. As for Series 1 itself, it's pretty good and certainly has the foundations of a great series. Any issues I have with Series 1 are gone in later series. Series 2 started airing just 6 months later, with a few changes. But we'll get to that in a different video. If you liked this video and you are interested in what else I do, why not check out my other videos that I've made so far. And if you're really interested, why not click subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss a video.